This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Hi, and welcome to Rogers TV. I'm David Shearman. This is a special presentation on the National Day of Mourning, which is honored on April 28th, 2023, in honor of those who have been injured or who have died from workplace accidents and have suffered workplace injuries. And lest we think that this is something that doesn't happen, it does. And I'm pleased to have with me Dave Trumble, who is Vice President, Bruce County, and Chris Stephen, who is Vice President, Grey County of the Grey Bruce Labor Council. Dave, Chris, good to have you here today.
Thanks for having us again.
Great to be here.
Yeah, now just before the show, we were talking about sort of the nature of workplace or occupational injury. I guess that's the correct title. Is that the sort of general category we can use?
It is really, when you talk about health and safety, you often talk about an occupational health and safety program.
Right. And every person who works is affected by occupational health and safety. I was actually just reading a book on the early days of chemistry and how chemistry has influenced our society. And I'm early into the book, but they were saying that back in the time of the French Revolution, when washing soda was invented, one of the byproducts of producing washing soda or sodium carbonate was hydrochloric acid that workers breathed. And there were horrendous worker injuries. Now, that's more than 200 years ago, but dare I say, not much has changed.
Well, David, it would be barely out of living memory now that benzene was part of aftershave lotion. Benzene is a designated substance. It has its own standalone regulation and is recognized as a hazardous substance causing a myriad of illnesses in the workplace when exposure takes place.
I'll remember that next time I put on aftershave. And I'll look for benzene on the ingredients list. Even that is a big change too, because workers have the right to know what's in their workplace and what chemicals they're actually working with, don't they?
If I may, just that's, you've actually hit on the theme this year. The theme from the Canadian Labour Congress is to remind workers to know their rights and then to exercise their rights. We often are sort of buried in statistics, and we do all the right things. We take the time to think about the loss you talked about at the top of the show there, but it is that every once in a while, let's go back to reset and just get people to remember and to become knowledgeable of their rights.
Sure. Know what you're working with, know how to work safely, perhaps, and make sure that there is some sense of accountability, that you do have the right to say no.
Well, the first thing when you go into any shop or working location that you should be able to find when you're talking about chemicals is MSDS sheets. So I know when we're doing our shop inspections, it's the first thing we go to make sure they're there. We make sure they're up to date. And every working location, if it has chemicals, even cleaning chemicals like Windex or whatever, the MSD sheets are to be there, displayed. Your workers are to know where they are, so that if somebody comes for a random inspection, the worker can go without a manager being there and say, there's the MSDS sheets, they're there, and feel comfortable in that knowledge. And if workers don't know that, that's a problem. And I don't think that training is always being done.
And it's even as simple as things like photocopiers and laser printers, because one of the side product or byproducts of running a laser printer or a photocopier is ozone. And ozone is not healthy stuff. I've gone into more than one office and seen, there's a laser printer right here. This probably should not be here.
Actually, talking about sort of office hazards, Sometimes when we think of occupational health and safety and people that are injured or worse, sometimes it's an easy oversight to skip over the people that are sitting at a desk. And, step aside from, being struck by or electrocuted or fall, or you've alluded to the chemical ones, the highest percentage of injuries year over year over year is musculoskeletal disease. And musculoskeletal disease is ever present in office environments.
And it's things like using the wrong chair, positioning,
Yes.
not using a telephone headset as opposed to a handset. How many people started work like that? I did for years until I got a headset. Now, well, you can see it here. It's absolutely essential. It's absolutely essential. Well, let's dig a little deeper into the National Day of Mourning. And what's the purpose of the National Day of Mourning?
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, the National Day of Mourning is that time that we stop and we reflect on people that have been killed, injured, made sick in the workplace. It is a day that we are really trying to push now, that it's becoming increasingly important. I was looking up statistics the other day, and it's an average of 900 people a year are killed in the workplace. That is the last data that we have. It was 923 or something like that in 2019, which is the last accurate data. And 30 of those were young workers. Now we need to think about that, because they're the ones that's why we do this work. We all get complacent and we need to try to keep up to date on our training. That's our responsibility, but it's also our responsibility that a new worker coming into a workplace, it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter if it's a fast food restaurant, a factory, they need to be trained, they need to be kept safe, because everybody, and I mean everybody, has the right to come back home to their families at the end of the day safe and sound. And that is our main goal, is to keep that message going out there. And this is that time when we really pump that message extra so that people actually take time to think about it.
And are there special events planned with the Labor Council this year?
There's two that are currently set to run, where we're actually back in Bruce Power Space for the first time since pre-COVID. Now, that's not open to the general public. It's inside their workspace. For this will be year 28, I believe, that but like I say, except for COVID, there would have been a ceremonies. And this is the 28th year we've had a ceremony on the site, and it is rather the way we'd like to see it done everywhere. The unions, the employers. Sometimes we're very fortunate to even have family members of those who were injured or killed back during the construction days, primarily at the event. So yes, there will be a Bruce Power event on the 27th, and there's just corporate reasons for doing it the day ahead. And then I know that between our past president, Hazel Pratt Page, and my good brother, Chris, there's work being done to establish an event in Hanover also. And Chris, you may have more details.
The Hanover event has been going every year. Hazel has made sure that it has stayed running. I'm usually back to work by then, so I don't usually always have the opportunity to participate, but it's a great event. They have it in the square. They have a piper, they have speakers, they take moments of silence. If you've never experienced it, I encourage you to go and participate. I'm not going to name names of the family, but the last one I remember that I was able to attend, we had a brother in 255 that was killed in an electrical accident. His parents show up every year to the Day of Mourning event in Hanover, and we saw the trucks, hydro trucks, all come in, and each one of those workers attended that service, and each one of them took a moment and gave kind words to that family and hugged them. And you see how close people are and what this does to people and how it brings them together. Many tears were shed as those guys each lined up to take their turn hugging that family on their way out. And that's what it's all about. It's about remembrance. It's about taking that time to be together.
It really is. When I think of the Memorial Rock that's outside of the Bruce Power Corporate Support Center, one of the earliest names is a man named Sjord Zotout. And Sjord, during construction, lost his life in 1962. And his widow, until she passed, once she became aware of our ceremony, she came every year. I mean, it was an arduous, onerous task for her. She was not a young woman. She was in her 90s by the time she realized we were having this ceremony. But there was no obstacle too big.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And I will mention, while we're on the topic, we also have flag raisings in several communities. There will be Day of Mourning flag raisings in Kincardine, Saugeen Shores, Owen Sound, Erin Eldersley, Brockton. I think I've probably missed one or two, Chris.
That's the ones that I can think of: Kincardine, Brockton, Saugeen Shores, Erin Eldersley, Owen Sound. Yep. And Hanover, of course.
Right.
So those events are obviously open to the public, and there'll be publicity beforehand with starting times. I know the ones in Owen Sound are usually in the morning, quite often just before the workday starts.
It's coming. The event is designed, not to say that the two events are exactly the same, but they do have a lot in common. Much like Remembrance Day, where most of the events start at 11. I think the heritage piece is that typically you'll see a lot of events start at around 11, and I think that's when it's focused. But clearly, organizers will do as they see most appropriate for their community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but to watch the media, because that's where people will find the exact time and exact date, because as you said, the Bruce Power one is a day before. There may be some flexibility around local arrangements as well.
Yes, and we have one of our sister labor councils south of here, Huron. They're doing theirs on the Sunday. They have a place where they actually have some names not too far from the gaol, the old jail, and they will convene at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon as an example.
Sure. Well, it's certainly a community, a time of community memory, and it's as current as the news of the day. I just recall in the last couple of weeks there being a serious industrial accident at a hotel down on the airport strip. And one of the things that clues me into the fact that this is considered to be an injured worker and an industrial accident is that the Ministry of Labor is investigating. Those words just say to me, okay, this is a workplace accident. This is a serious workplace accident. So news aside, those are important things to remember if you see or hear this in the media. I think the other thing that we also kind of forget, I won't say forget, but we kind of don't associate with Day of Mourning, is that our emergency services are also subject to workplace issues. Our police services, we've lost 9 police officers since September of 2022, and most recently, an officer in Quebec who is a sergeant who was investigating a domestics situation. There were 2 officers killed in Edmonton. There were 2 killed in a domestic situation in Innisfil. So it just seems to go on and on and on. But these are also workplace accidents or workplace deaths.
Clearly, I'm so appreciative of the first responder community when they come out and line the streets and really formally take the time to honor their fallen, it's not a fallen comrade, it's their fallen workmate. And I think I've said a couple of times, even on this show, I would love it if the rank and file of workers in Ontario or any jurisdiction did the exact same thing. Anytime, whether it's the person at the cement factory or up in Aylmer that were killed in the last couple of weeks, the person who was injured and may or may not, be in a situation to succumb to injuries, that workers, did the exact same thing within a few days. Because, nothing brings the message home quicker than, a large group of people taking the time to honor their workmate.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've also can be missed, but if you pay attention to, is the lowering of flags to half-mast. or half staff. And I happen to drive by the OPP station in Chatsworth on a regular basis, and I noticed that the flags are at half. They have been at half mast to honor the police officers killed in Edmonton and the police officer killed in Quebec. Same in Owen Sound, same in other communities, and I'm sure if the same would be true of Bruce Power and any municipality where there was a workplace death.
I've always been very pleased with whatever the employer of record is, whether it was Ontario Hydro or OPG or Bruce Power today. Even a person who is part of the workplace family, they pass away. Could be any reason, but obviously an occupational injury of some type would be very much front and center. The flags are always at half staff. I remember when Duncan Hawthorne was the chief executive officer. He would say, in perhaps other words, but, his job was many, many, many things. But his most important job was to make sure another name was never added to the memorial rock.
And the other thing is, you mentioned this, Dave, and I think it's worth remembering that the impact of occupational exposure over the years can be cumulative. And I'm thinking of our firefighters, for example. Just in Sound, there was a budget item to buy new bunker equipment for the firefighters. And as the fire chief pointed out very clearly, we have to do this because we need two sets, because we have to have one set being cleaned while we wear the other. And I thought, gee, yeah. And he said, and it's because we're exposed to some pretty nasty chemicals and some of the stuff we don't know anything about, but we've got to go in there and fight a fire. So we just don't know these impacts, which are often cumulative over the years.
I think that's becoming more common as we progress with science and awareness. I've seen articles actually on that, how fire departments are starting to go to two sets of bunker gear because of, they take it off and they might get called out again later and their bunker gear is dirty. So they're still inhaling off of that bunker gear the smoke and the fumes from the previous fire. Like, how many times do we go to bonfires in the summer and we come in the house and we can still smell that smoke on us? Can you imagine what they're taking in, the amount? And then if they put those clothes back on, it's so important that we take care of our first responders. But now that we're talking about first responders, let's talk about the other aspect that's really becoming prevalent in health and safety, and that's the mental health aspect. We need to really look at, in this province, getting supports for everybody, but we need to start with our emergency services for PTSD events, all of them. Can you imagine what they see? The stuff, the trauma they go through? To me, there should be a person on site as soon as they get back, a hired mental health person to help talk to them, someone that they can go in with one-on-one, or if they just want to get it out as a group, something to help them through the horrific things that they see.
As well as build resilience.
I was just going to say one of the other components, which is obviously not as visible, has been the whole conversation around mental health on this side of sort of that acute period of time during COVID. People have experienced a lot of mental anguish for a variety of reasons, and we're not entirely sure where that cohort of people is going to land off. I know about a year and a half into the sort of, I say, the front end of COVID, I remember people talking about there were going to be two subsequent pandemics. One was going to be ergonomics and MSDs, and we alluded to why earlier on, and the other one was going to be mental health. And those will take some number of years because, of course, MSDs, as we said, have a latency to them, and mental health, to a certain degree, has a latency. I mean, many, many, many people could say, "Oh, don't worry about me, I'm fine," and they'll function quite well for a number of years. But many, many times, the old story about the chickens coming home to roost, there comes a time when that burden becomes too much. And those counseling efforts need to be right at hand.
And it's not as if it's fixable once. It can also be cumulative, both physically and mentally. You injure yourself once and you're not as strong as you were. You injure yourself again, and well, that back may be really hurt.
There's an excellent set of videos that Chris and I are likely both very, very fortunate to have seen from the Workers' Health and Safety Center, which is the center that most unions lean on for health and safety training. And they have a doctor in one of the videos that talks about that relationship between chronic and acute. And he says it's not necessarily one incident that injures the person. It's when you have a chronic exposure to whether it's chemicals or whether it's lifting, and then you have what they call the chronic over the acute. And that one last one is what actually sends the person into crisis.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's also talk a little bit about the connection between work injury and addiction, because I have come across a number of situations where someone has injured themselves and they end up being addicted to opioid painkillers, and those are really hard to kick. And the person has basically been prescribed a life of medicated pain, and then it gets cut off, and oops, they got a problem, and we've got a problem.
Yeah, that's becoming the amount of opioid addiction is becoming a staggering number. What those opioid addictions are leading to, suicides and all these other things, is we're just on the tip of the iceberg of finding out what this is going to do. It's something we need to be aware of. It's something our politicians need to be aware of, because they're going to be the front lines of trying to help us with this problem, making sure that there's proper mental health supports. It's all going to take funding. Workplaces are not going to be able to do this on their own. People are not going to be able to do this on their own. We need supports in place to help anybody that's got an addiction. And like you said, it can be as simple as starting from an injury, getting prescribed a painkiller, and the next thing, you're hooked. Mm-hmm. And it leads to a whole other thing. So yeah, I agree 100% with you, but we need to be on our politicians to make sure future supports are in place for those people so that they can get the help that they need.
An interesting dimension to that, we had a speaker at a day of mourning ceremony several years back who related the story of a relative who, as you know, in the building trades, not every building trades job is a union job. So initially, the person was working a union job with all the benefits that would go with a contract, including health benefits. So they would have been able to, have appropriate time off and rest and all that sort of good stuff. They got laid off, as often happens when the work finishes, and the only work available was in a non-union job. And they were injured in that environment with no availability of sick benefits, paid sick days. And as a result, the only way for them to go to work was to go to work each day after consuming a certain amount of opioid pain relievers. And what it did is it ended up in an addiction, which ultimately, maybe not by itself, but was probably this most significant contributor to the person actually taking their own life.
Mm. And that becomes, how shall I say it, a spiral. Mm-hmm. It just becomes a spiral. And all of this is part of worker injury, that kind of thing. Well, we've got about 4 minutes left. So I just wanted to touch on one other thing before and that's the idea of, and you touched on it there for a moment, Dave, sick benefits and mandatory sick leave, paid sick leave. And that's been it was there during COVID, but it's gone.
Yeah, I think when I think back to my conversations with my local MPPs, now the Labour Council straddles two ridings, as you know, Huron Bruce and Bruce Grey Owen Sound. And I remember both of them at the time. This would be back, probably about 2017, 2018, when paid sick days were becoming a very, very resonant topic. And they both said, well, Dave, we can't just listen to you guys. We have to listen to everybody. Okay, great. I'm really glad to hear that. And of course, along comes COVID, and people are asking, everyone is asking for paid sick time. And what was the first position they took? Yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Or we're going to give you some token 2 days or 3 days. I mean, give the federal government credit. The federal government got out in front of this. They put up 10 days for, federal employees. So, sadly, the idea of we listen to everybody, well, no, it just means that once again, that people that need to listen remain as tone deaf as they ever have been.
Yes, indeed.
It's unfortunate, but it is one of the benefits of unionized work is that we do get our sick days negotiated into our contracts. But it's also a stark reminder that it's our responsibility to not just fight for unionized workers, fight for all workers. And I think you see that coming out of many unions now, that they're 15 in fairness to make sure everybody has a equal wage, or like this, the sick days one. It's being taken up in the unions, not for union workers. It's being taken up for all workers.
That That's version of a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Yeah. Or another issue that is certainly current is not just the minimum wage, but the living wage. So we've got, it's all integrated. It's all part of a much larger whole, isn't it?
Well, I think if you actually talk about that, you talk about that idea of living wage and precarious work, it brings us right back to mental health.
Yep. Very true. Very, very true. So let's just remind people again, there are Day of Mourning events in various communities across Grey Bruce, and to watch the media for the start times, because those are our events that are certainly open to the public. There are flag raisings, and it's a time of remembrance, and dare I say the word, saying thanks for people who have done such a great job and continue to do good work, no matter what the job.
And David, if I may, people, if they can't make it to a ceremony, stop for a minute on the 28th, wherever you are. Take a minute, wherever you are, just stop and think about it. Think about what we've talked about, and take that time of reflection. At the end of the Day of Mourning ceremony, I've often said, just take a minute and think about this in your own way.
Okay.
And if I could add to that, let's not forget the whole main credo of Day of Mourning is to take a moment to mourn for the dead, but to fight like hell for the living. And we all need to take that responsibility on. Dave and I do it regularly. Other union leaders do it regularly. It's our responsibility to take this fight on, to make sure health and safety is held accountable in every workplace. And let's especially look out for our young workers when they're coming in. We got to make sure that they have safe environments, learn this stuff early so that they have safe, long working careers. And for us that have been around for a while, we can't get complacent. It's a stark reminder that complacency leads to disaster.
Well, I want to thank the both of you, Dave Trumble, Chris Stephen of the Grey Bruce Labor Council, for sharing your thoughts on Day of Mourning. And friends, thank you. I trust that you'll be able to join in some of the events on the National Day of Mourning on or around April 28th, 2023. I'm David Shearman. This is Rogers TV.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
October 5th, 2014, my daughter was hit by a train. She was walking along the sides of the tracks, and it shattered her world.
After a night out with your friends, not having a plan for a safe ride home can leave you in a bad spot. You could end up riding in a police car, an ambulance, or a hearse. These unplanned